I have a few slides I wanted to go over that reinforce some stuff we talked about forgiveness a couple weeks ago. In this passage in Luke about the one debtor being forgiven a 50 denarii and the other 500, notice that it says he freely forgave them both. And then Simon says that I suppose the one who he forgave more would love him more. That word, it's freely forgave and forgave, is the same Greek word. And this was one of three words that is translated as forgiveness, charizomai. You can see it looks kind of like charismatic. This is the only time this is used in the Gospels where you see the word forgiveness. This is the only time that the Greek word is charizomai. Usually you see this particular word in Paul's epistles in the context of using it to mean forgive, because all three of these forgiveness words can mean something else in another context. So the three words were aphiemi, which literally means to send away. That's used a lot in the Gospels, like in Luke 17:3, if your brother sins against you, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. It's like the idea of you're sending away their transgression from the person. And that could also mean divorce. If you're talking about a person, right? So in another context, it can mean divorce. And so Paul uses the word aphiemi sometimes in his epistles, but not in the context of forgiveness, only when he's talking about divorce. So if you look at like
That's putting away, right?
sending away, right? So you can send away a person, but if you're talking about forgiveness, it's like you're sending away their sin, their debt, right? So that's used a lot in the Gospels, the sending away one, aphiemi. And then there's apaluo, which is where we get words like loose, the lu, that means to unbind, release. You could be released from prison. That's another word for forgiveness. And that's also in the Gospels. You also see it in Acts sometimes when someone's literally being freed from bondage. And then this third one, charizomai, that's the one that Paul tends to use when he's talking about forgiveness. He doesn't really use the other two. I think there's something to that. We had talked about at the beginning of our forgiveness study what the actual root of the English word is, and that it's got that word give in it. And so it kind of literally means to give completely or something like that. But we, just like those Greek words, we kind of have a different context for the word give. Like you could say, forgive me if I'm taking liberty with what I'm saying here, right? You can kind of mean to grant or, allow, right? So this word charizomai comes from the word charis, which is the word for grace in the New Testament. And it can mean, just like in English, grace has kind of a range of meaning. It can be that which affords joy. And it comes from chara or chairo, means joy or gladness or to rejoice. And that can be used as a greeting. So like when the angel comes, Gabriel comes to Mary and says, hail, that's actually this word kairo, which means rejoice. So it can mean forgive, but it can also just have to do with giving gifts or being generous. So another place where it does occur in the Gospels is here where John the Baptist is in prison and kind of needs some reassurance that Jesus is in fact the Christ. And he sends men to ask Jesus about this. Are you the coming one, or do we look for another? And that very hour, Jesus cured many infirmities, afflictions, and evil spirits, and to many blind he gave sight. And so that word gave there is that charizomai. It's the same word that Paul uses as forgive or forgave a lot. Freely give, like healed his sight completely, right? So it can just mean give generously too in certain contexts. And so here's a few examples of Paul using the word when he's not talking about forgiveness. It's kind of the same, the freely giving concept. In Romans 2:29, he who did not spare his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also freely give us all things? 1 Corinthians 2:12, now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God, that we might know the things which have been freely given to us by God. And then in Galatians 3, for if the inheritance is of the law, it is no longer of promise, but God gave it to Abraham by promise. And so all three of those words are what is in other contexts forgive, but just to show the kind of the range of meaning there. But Paul always uses, when he's talking about forgiveness, his gospel is apart from the law, grace through faith alone. And so this word, of those three words, this one is the one he gravitates to because it is the one that kind of has the connotation of freely giving, that it's not just here's your debt and I'm wiping out the debt, but it's got this connotation of generosity. And it gets a little bit lost in the English, right? We see the word forgive in the Gospels and in Paul's writings, and we don't realize that, there's slightly different terminology there under the surface.